The federal workforce is reeling from massive cuts to government agencies, and this is having a real-life human impact. Among those impacted are, of course, the nation's veterans. The Trump administration says the goal is to terminate about 80,000 employees from the VA department. Last night, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine held a town hall in Virginia for veterans concerned over what these firings mean for them.
I must say that my experience with the VA, disabled veteran, obviously, has been fantastic. Yes, getting in is hard. Some of the wait times are not good. But I've had nothing but great things at the DC VA I go to. I have a primary care doctor. I love the doctor. I love all of the clinicians. I'll be very upset if I lose these clinical people.
If you tell veterans we're going to fire up to another 80,000 people who work for the VA, you're telling them that it's already hard to get care. Now it's going to be much harder.
So you have the concern about cuts at the VA, and then, what about those veterans who work for the federal government who are impacted by these government cuts? I want to go now to Terry Uniter, who is an Army veteran dealing with the fallout of these government cuts firsthand. He is now in limbo, essentially, with his family. So, Terry, thank you for coming on. So walk us through what has happened to you. You were all set to do this job in Japan. You sent over all your belongings, and then what happened?
So thank you for having me on your show. So I'm third generation Army. I retired and I was working as a contractor. And I thought that this international relations job in Japan was important enough that I was willing to take a $60,000 pay cut to go over there. I verified 3 times with United States Forces Japan and the hiring people, OPM, hey, am I good to proceed to station? And I was told, hey, you're good to go. And then at the last moment, 24 hours before flying to Japan, they told me, hey, that exemption that we thought that you had, it's not good. And to make it worse, 12 hours before flying, they contacted me again to say, well, actually, we had our wires crossed. You're good to proceed. And then 5 hours before flying, they were like, hey, remember what we just told you like a few hours ago? We're sorry. Actually, you're still not good to come.
What?
Yeah, so like all my stuff is on a boat right now going to Japan. I was fortunate enough to get my car back. It was about to be loaded on the boat at the vehicle processing center, but I was like, hey, I don't know when I'm going over to Japan. Can I please have it back?
You sent all your stuff over, you got your car back, but you also have a son who you pulled out of school, right?
I pulled him out of school. I put my home up for sale. Not for sale, for rent. So we're basically sleeping on the floor right now.
Living out of a suitcase.
Yes, but in the midst of all of this, I will say the command in Japan has done everything, from the commander all the way on down. Lieutenant General Jost has been advocating with the Pentagon for me personally to try to get me an exemption to the hiring freeze, and which it just did come through. But in lieu of everything else going on, I do not think I'll be accepting the position.
So finally, that exemption that you were supposed to have, you said it just came through after you've been sleeping on the floor in limbo, but you're not going to take the job.
So in the midst of all of this, there's one person that I've been very, extremely disappointed with, and that's my congressman, Andy Harris. I called up his office, and he told me, what do you want me to do about it? It's too early for me to intervene.
He told you that directly, or his staff?
His staff did, but there's protests going in Maryland because evidently everybody's getting the same answer from his office. Hey, I was told, what can we do for you? There's nothing we can do. I'm like, you're my elected official. You can advocate on my behalf. And they're like, well, it's too early. I'm like, how is it too early? I just resigned from my job. All my stuff is going over to Tokyo right now. At what point is it not too early?
Yeah.
So if he's not willing to do his job, then I will.
So you're saying you tried, you went to your representative, not get anywhere. This exemption just came through. You don't want to take the job. Now you just have to wait to see if your belongings come back from Japan.
Yes.
And
as DOJ continues its efforts to overhaul the federal government, the VA now says it will lay off more than 80,000 workers in a major agency-wide reorganization that is set for August. Joining us now, founder and CEO of Independent Veterans of America and host of the Independent Americans podcast, Paul Rieckhoff. I want to talk about NATO, but let's talk about veterans first. This is a president who campaigned on protecting, cherishing, valuing veterans. There's been no such consideration given to veterans within the federal government.
That's exactly right. They're saying one thing and doing another. And you ask me how I'm doing, I'm pissed off. and veterans around this country are pissed off, and Americans around this country are pissed off, because it's like every day we're getting another body blow to the soul of America. And here we have not even a public announcement, but a leaked memo that the new VA secretary, who's a pretty radical guy, is now going to lay off 83,000 people at the VA. 25% of them are veterans. Meanwhile, as you cut into the federal government, 1/3 of all of those cuts are veterans. We got the unemployment rate down in the beginning of the year to just over 4%, historic low. We've been fighting for 20 years to get the veterans' unemployment rate down. This is going to blow it up. And that's the actual effect of what they are doing will have. No matter what they say, watch what they're doing. And right now, the flamethrower that is Doge and Elon Musk is coming straight for the VA.
Is there blowback? Obviously, there's blowback from veterans who've been fired. What about families of veterans, people who voted for Donald Trump in veterans communities? What have you been seeing?
Yeah, I'm seeing it come from all sides. And where I've really been seeing it come from is inside the VA for the last couple of months. They're demoralized. They feel beaten down. There's no clarity. There's no certainty. Everybody's waiting for the Doge guillotine to drop and get an email in the middle of the night to find out that they're fired. These are people who are disabled veterans. These are people who've honorably served their country and want to continue to serve their country. But they're also fighters. And I've said this before, I think they're making a bit of a miscalculation because veterans are fighting back. There are going to be protests starting as early as next week. We're recruiting independent veterans who've been laid off and fired to run for office this year. We've gotten over 200 of them already that are interested. And we're going to organize like we always do. We're going to fight back for what is sacred. And I think we're going to be a lead element for this entire country, not.
Joining us now, NBC's Jacob Soboroff reporting from Atlanta. Mark McKinnon is former advisor to George W. Bush and John McCain and co-host of The Circus. Mark, the CEO of the Institute of Peace, said he'd been in talks with D.C. police ever since the president signed an executive order targeting the nonprofit. Take a listen.
We have been talking to them for many weeks now, and in anticipation of just this possibility. And also to remind them that we are a private, nonprofit corporation in the District of Columbia, and therefore not a federal agency, and therefore the federal government has no entitlement to come in and take over our building.
What does this latest move tell us about Doge, Mark?
Well, it just reaffirms what's going on, which is that they're using an axe and not a scalpel. And the irony of this is that this particular agency, their mission is to advance U.S. values in conflict resolution, to end wars, and promote good government. I mean, that sounds like something from the Trump campaign. So this is not just some rogue agency that's giving away money to a bunch of peaceniks around the world. These are people involved in really supporting the sort of values and ideas that are being promoted by the Trump administration.
Jacob, you're in Atlanta, where later today, I understand, fired CDC workers are going to hold a protest outside headquarters. And I know you spoke to some of the laid off workers. What did they tell you?
That the reality of their lives, Chris, and the reality of their jobs is very different from the way that President Trump has described these federal workers and what they do or don't do while on the clock for the United States government and the American taxpayer. I spoke to 3 workers that were fired from the CDC live yesterday during Deadline White House on Nicole's show. Here's a little bit of what they told me about that discrepancy.
I went to work every day. My colleagues went to work every day. And our coalitions that we worked with would have known and noticed if we weren't working and actively providing them with the services that we were hired to do.
What's it like, Stephanie, for the man who's ostensibly in charge of your employment, albeit at a very high level, speak about the work that you and your colleagues have done in that way?
It's frustrating to not be seen as valuable. I think the work we do is, very great for the American people. The whole goal is to help protect and save lives, and to be said that we just didn't show up to work, to me, says that he felt like we didn't show up for the American people.
Might any of you consider not returning to work in the federal government categorically because of the experience that you guys have been going through? I mean, are you confident you're not going to be fired again, even if you are reinstated?
Oh, we will be fired again.
I think the expectation is that we will probably be fired again. I personally would love to do my job.
Despite the fact, Chris, that a federal judge in the district court in Maryland has ordered the Trump administration to reinstate all 25,000 probationary workers that it had fired over the course of the last month or so, those 3 women who work at CDC and many of their colleagues have told me as of not only yesterday when we sat down and spoke by the 1 p.m. deadline, but as of today, they have not yet received their reinstatement paperwork to put them on administrative leave. And as you heard them say they're worried they're just going to be fired again once they're back into the federal government so that the Trump administration can execute their firings in the legal way, because the judge, of course, said that the way that the Trump administration has done this so far has been illegal.
So illegal doesn't help someone, right, Mark, who's trying to figure out what their future is, who's told to go back into the office and find out they don't have a chair to sit in, or a computer to type on, or a pen to write with. How does government function like this? If people are concerned about government function and whether or not government is being the most functional it can be, how does this contribute?
That's exactly the right question to ask, Chris. Because, I've been in Republican campaigns for years with Bush and McCain, and just over the years, a big mantra has been this sort of anti-government push. I mean, these days it's more sort of, whether or not you're for government or against government, and Republicans across the border against government. Well, now they've caught the car, they're in charge. And the approach has been a very MAGA approach, which is to say, well, in order to please the base, we're just going to cut everything and please the base and show them that we're basically shutting down government. Well, people are starting to realize that government has a real function, and that a lot of these supposed deep state employees are really good, valuable, hardworking people, not working for very much money. And I mean,
so folks, I'm not defending the rationale, but there were a lot of people, including soldiers, active military people, veterans, who voted for Trump because they thought that he was the guy who loved them the most. He was going to put veterans and active soldiers and whatnot first. And that and some of them actually believe this, he was the pro-peace candidate. He was going to be the one less likely to get the U.S. involved in conflict. And what we've seen is the opposite. He and Musk have been slashing the public service. And of course, they're not necessarily directly targeting veterans specifically. But the effect is that veterans are more likely to be represented in the federal government because of the fact that, if you serve the public in the military, when you retire from the military, a lot of them gravitate towards serving the public in a more administrative capacity, which is great. And there are also hiring programs that help get veterans jobs after they leave the active soldier life and they go work for various areas of the government. And so when you make those cuts, it's more likely to hit veterans than if you were to cut jobs at some random private company. And so right off the bat, he's breaking the promise. And again, they're not firing veterans who happen to be bad at their jobs. They're firing people that do essential work and often on their assessments and whatnot are at the very least satisfactory, if not exemplary workers, right? And it's all connected to their desire to put billionaires first. And you've even seen, Trump's the pro-peace candidate. He's creating all of this international conflict, creating trade wars if we're lucky, with Canada, Mexico, Panama, Greenland, Europe in general, Denmark in particular, right? All of this insane stuff. Wants to invade Gaza and build luxury condos there. Do you think that's going to be a peaceful process? Right? Handing over much of the world to Putin. That's going to lead to more conflict. Donald is making the people that trusted him most the biggest losers in his early administration.